Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our public webinar, The Trend, where we expound together with in-house and external subject matter experts on current topics affecting your lives and investments. I'm Steve Lim, Chief Learning Officer of Affin Hwang Asset Management, and I'll be your host and the moderator for today. Today's discussion is premised on the scientific findings that burning of fossil fuel and emission of carbon by human activities, contrary to Donald Trump's claim of a Chinese host, contributes to global warming. Before this session started, you saw the video with images of vagaries of global warming, rising sea levels, melting iceberg, causing hunting grounds of polar bears to be uninhabitable, wildfire in California and Australia, ravaging through the homes and both human beings and wild animals, and severe drought leading to diminishing arable lands. Is going green a political tactic rich nations use to marginalize the competitiveness of developing countries, or a necessary paradigm shift we mankind must adopt to save our Mother Earth for our own and next generation? With Biden's presidency, green revolution and environmental related investment have suddenly brought in focus now and in the foreseeable future. Today, we will sharpen the discussion of everything green and hopefully shed some light with the help of a few subject matter experts. In today's forum, aptly titled The Green Revolution, Fad or Future, we hope to unearth some of these discussions and help our audience decipher the meaning behind sustainability. To get started, let's begin with a poll to warm up. There will actually be two poll questions that we'd like to ask the audience today. The first one, when we invest, should we care if our investment would have a positive or negative impact on the environment? A, yes, the well-being of the environment is tied to ours. No, investment and environments are two unrelated separate things. C, perhaps I have not made up my mind. Number two, would you buy an electric vehicle for your next car? Yes, no, or you haven't made up your mind, you don't know. In the meantime, here are some reminders to improve the internet connection of your Zoom sessions. We recommend you closing access windows or applications. There will also be a Q&A sessions at the end of today's forum. Okay, please feel free to type your questions, or during the panel discussion, there will be a Q&A session. Type in your questions and submit it via the Zoom Q&A box. You can also click like to upvote questions to the top. For those who have submitted the questions during registration, we have blended your questions into our panel discussion. Okay. Lastly, we would like to make a disclaimer to all our guests today. Please note that today's forum and all related content is for discussion purpose only. Nothing from this forum is intended to be or should be construed as an offer to buy or sell, or an invitation to subscribe to any securities or investment. Please do your own research or speak to a qualified investment professionals before making any investment decisions. Next up, allow me to introduce our distinguished panelists, panel speaker. Okay, first we have Yong Sien, widely known as Sien. Okay, Sien Wong. Sien is a Board of Engineers Malaysia registered mechanical engineer and has been in the power engineering industry for more than 14 years with extensive experience in various operations on the manufacturing side, sales, regional and domestic, business development, and strategic senior management roles. His industry exposure covers business dealings with new energy technology companies, utilities, government and private sector, as well as infrastructure project investment, merger and acquisition exercises. He previously served for 6 years as a Director of Business Development and Power Distribution Division in Toshiba Transmission and Distribution System Asia, where he was part of the management team. Currently, he's the CEO, director, and shareholder of Hasilwan and where he leads the company's business operation and investment business in the power grid utilities. Essentially the Tenaga, Sarawak, the energy, ASEAN utility markets. His personal interest also lies with renewable energy generation technology, solar in particular, photovoltaic, and other technological and new business model driven solutions that could positively impact the energy industry. Okay, our second panelist is our in-house expert, Mr. Yip Ka-Ming. Ka-Ming joined Affin Hwang Asset Management in October 2019 as an investment analyst covering China's utility and telco sector. Before Affin Hwang Asset Management, Ka-Ming was a sell-side construction analyst with Hong Leong Investment Bank. Ka-Ming graduated with a Bachelor's of Art in Economics from the National University of Singapore and has a postgraduate diploma in professional accounting from Monash University in Melbourne, Australia. He's also an ACCA affiliate and has passed all levels of CFA examinations. Okay, the third is Ernest Kwok, Learning Associate of Affin Hwang Asset Management. Ernest is currently an associate at the Learning Academy in Affin Hwang Asset Management. During his 3 years at the University of Warwick, where he completed a Bachelor of Science in Management, he developed a strong interest in public speaking and international relations. He participated in the total 9 international model United Nations conferences, winning 8 awards for debating quality in the process. In addition, he served as the training officer of the Warwick United Nations Society, leading the Warwick team to multiple awards at different conferences throughout the UK. In his free time, you probably find him reading or rereading The Economist and The New Statesman. Okay, I can vouch that Ernest is extremely well read and he's a very keen follower of international relations and politics. Okay. Is the poll ready? Well, if the poll result is ready, let's take a look. Okay, the first poll, yes, the well-being of environment is tied to ours, 69%. I'm very, very glad to see this. No, investment and environment are two unrelated things, 10%. You have 22% of you have not made up your mind. So if you don't care about the environment, you don't care about renewable energy, I guess you would not have signed up, you would not be interested in this forum in the first place. Okay, that's very good news. I think we are talking to the right audience. I think the challenge is to talk to the rest that don't really care or are not communicated or not aware of what kind of world we are living in today. Okay, would you buy an electric vehicle for your next car? Okay, I don't know why you say yes. Could be trying to save the money or save the environment, but very good. 50% of you say yes. 10% no. Okay, and 42% have not made up your mind. You're probably waiting for the technology to mature. Okay, now let's move on. To begin today's forum, I would like to invite Ernest to set the direction of this forum right by giving you, our audience, a brief on the various green industry and their operating environment from a high-level macro perspective. We are assuming today's audience to be a man on the street who is interested in this particular topic. So we shall not get too technical over the discussion or over our presentation material. Okay, Ernest, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve, for the time. Good morning to everyone tuning in, whether you are from Malaysia or anywhere else. It's really, really an honor to speak to you on what is undoubtedly one of the most important topics of our time. As Steve has mentioned earlier, this is more of a bird's eye view of the topic. It's a very high-level overview, so don't expect us to get too much into the specifics of everything that's going on here. So let's begin. One moment. Okay. Okay, so I know what many of you are thinking. You're thinking, hey, I've seen all of this before. What about the Kyoto Protocol all the way back in 1977? What about the Paris Agreement in 2016? Both of those were greeted with a large deal of fanfare by everyone around the world, and there was a lot of hope when both of these agreements were signed that action would be made on climate change. So you would be correct to say that not much has been done. Kyoto and Paris were both very, very aggressive, very ambitious targets. And suffice to say, these targets have not really been met. Now we have to ask ourselves the question, why did Kyoto and Paris fail? Well, a success of an international agreement like Kyoto and Paris is only dependent on the consent of the countries that are participating in it. In particular, the US under George Bush pulled out of the Kyoto Protocol in 2000, and the US also under Donald Trump pulled out of the Paris Agreement in 2016. So what we want to notice here is that if the US is actively working against climate change and China was still growing their emissions because their economy was still growing, it was extremely difficult to make any sort of progress in the last 20 to 30 years on climate change. So what are we going to do here? We want to emphasize that the impetus for climate change is something that is not necessarily something that policymakers and governments could control. And what do we mean by this? We're talking about obviously the COVID-19 pandemic. To say that the COVID-19 pandemic has influenced almost every aspect of people's lives is a bit of an understatement. It's really disrupted many, many, many things. And as you can see, the lockdown measures implemented in the first half of 2020 severely decreased carbon emissions. And as people stayed home instead of driving, carbon polluting industry was shut down, borders were shut, which basically prevented international travel. This kind of, gave a little bit of hope to policymakers worldwide. They were thinking, okay, COVID-19 is clearly a natural event that has a large influence on, markets, that it is a reminder that we need to kind of keep in control of the environment. And they also realized in every crisis lies an opportunity. They began thinking about the future, that maybe this temporary trend in carbon emissions that were going down could become something a little bit more permanent. That maybe, just maybe, they can finally make good on some of the promises they made all the way earlier in Kyoto and in Paris. So, one moment. For many people, these will seem like completely empty words. That yes, we have heard exactly the same sort of rhetoric in 1997, in 2016, and nothing has changed. But one thing I want to emphasize today is that there's been a rather subtle but significant shift in global opinion, in the global consensus. What do I mean by this? World leaders are beginning to see climate change in different terms as they did before. They're acknowledging climate change as a larger threat, and new commitments are being made, more ambitious ones than before. So there was a recent climate ambition summit that was held to discuss precisely, carbon targets and etc. At this climate ambition summit, the European Union committed to 55% below 1990 levels by 2030, which is a significant increase over their previous goal of 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. The United Kingdom at the same summit pledged to cut emissions by at least 68% by 2030 below their 1990 levels, which is a very, very ambitious target. I want to emphasize to you all today that this is not simply a Western or a developed countries phenomenon. If we look over to the East, we can see South Korea and Japan have very recently announced their goal to be net zero by 2050. So there is this sort of global consensus. To underscore it further, let's take a look at the two countries with the largest global CO2 emissions, obviously the United States and China. Okay. Yep, okay. Historically speaking, the US has been one of the major opponents to any sort of climate change action to begin with. We ask ourselves, why have they been so strong in opposition? Well, for one, we have to consider the impact of big oil, the US's massive oil companies, as well as near total Republican opposition to any sort of climate bill. And what this means is that getting any sort of climate bill through Congress has been practically impossible. Some of you may remember that Barack Obama tried to get through a climate bill in 2010, obstructed by the Republicans. The climate bill was part of the reason why the Democratic Party lost their majority in Congress. So it's been very, very hard for any sort of Democratic president to get climate legislation through. And under the presidencies of Bush and Trump, again, we emphasize they pulled out of Kyoto and out of Paris. And basically didn't really do much to action on climate change. Now, the election of Joe Biden to the presidency in November last year kind of resulted in a very quick reversal of a lot of Trump-era policies. The most notable of these are, canceling the Keystone XL oil pipeline to Canada, as well as rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement, both of which were Trump-era policies. Trump wanted the pipeline, and Trump exited the Paris Agreement. Now, what Biden is also preparing is this massive $2 trillion infrastructure plan, which will have very large implications on climate change in the future. And it's going through Congress right now. We anticipate it will take a few months for it to work through and all of those things. Why is Biden doing this? Well, because there is actually a broad consensus in America that that Americans think governments can and should do more on climate. So any sort of action that is being taken on these issues is likely going to be really, really, really popular. A bit of a slam dunk, to put it that way. So let's kind of talk about China now, because China doesn't want to be outdone by the US, and they very recently announced at the same Climate Ambition Summit we mentioned earlier that they have a net zero target by 2060, and they plan to hit peak emissions by 2030. As you may know, China is the country with the largest emissions in the world. So this sends a pretty strong signal that they are taking this really, really, really seriously. One thing I want to emphasize here is that China and the US are also in competition on many fronts. They aim to be the dominant economic power, they aim to be the dominant technological power, aim to be the dominant military power. And you can see that China definitely wants to be seen as the world leader, not just economically, not just technologically, not just militarily, but also on climate. Xi Jinping will definitely make that one of his main goals. But it's important to keep in mind that there are two somewhat kind of contradictory ideas that are both true with regards to China and climate. That China is the undisputed leader in solar right now. They control a significant amount of the world's rare earth metal production, which is important for building wind turbines and solar panels. And they are the world's most developed EV market right now. But that also coal still makes up a large majority of their power grid. They're still planning to build more coal mines. They're still planning to build more gas. And there's still an expanding economy, which means that the carbon emissions are likely still going to grow. Holding these two ideas, contradictory ideas together, we are left with thus a few further questions to ask ourselves. So one moment. Yeah, these few questions are, the first question, obviously, are governments serious? We've seen governments make really, really grand plans on climate change before. The question we are asking, are they going to take it seriously? Are they actually going to move forward, or is this just talk to kind of appease the international community? The second question, kind of following on from the first one, is assuming that governments take it seriously, what can they do to the business landscape? What sort of policies will they implement? What sort of actions will they take? And what sort of impacts will they have on the business and markets? And finally, the question is, assuming that things change, assuming that they can implement policy, what will be the rate of change? Policy is notoriously difficult to put into practice. On paper, it looks easy, but actually getting it through is very, very difficult. I will say that it is inevitable that things will change. There will definitely be many things that will change, but the question is how much and how fast. So let's talk about some of those things that will change then. Perhaps the most obvious of this is renewable energy. This is one of the easiest areas, you could argue, to kind of green up. And what I want to emphasize here today is that renewable energy is kind of confounding some of the stereotypes that renewable energy has faced in the past. Not even 10 years ago, the stereotype was that renewable energy was much more expensive, that renewable energy was much more unreliable. And at least on the price front, renewable energy has become shockingly cheap. You can kind of see the precipitous decline in PV, photovoltaic, solar, as well as wind over the course of the last 10 years. So the technological advancements made have kind of resulted in this large reduction in price of renewable energy, making it significantly more affordable than it was. What's happening is that obviously, oil and gas still form oil, gas, coal still form a very large part of electricity production. But seeing this price decrease of solar and wind to the point that in many cases it's cheaper than all of these fossil fuels, are we at the point where large-scale shifts to renewable energy are already viable? A question to consider. Let's kind of talk a little bit more about the specific trends within the power grid. Let's talk a little bit more about where everything is going. As you can see, a large amount of the world's electricity production is still very much in coal. It hit a high of 40% a few years ago in 2012, and it's kind of dropping now. But I want to pay attention to gas as well. And you may be thinking, okay, as we substitute out coal for wind, solar, other renewable resources, why is gas still growing up? Why is that gas still increasing? And it's because gas is kind of a more emissions light alternative to coal. Think Coke light to normal Coke. And basically, as a lot of people want to kind of shift to renewables, kind of natural gas is seen as this stopgap. So it is likely that natural gas is still going to increase at some point in the future, partly because China is still planning on building more gas. But as you can see, wind and solar are actually starting from a relatively low base. This is important because the upshot of this is that there's a lot of growth potential ahead for wind and solar. There are still a lot of coal plants out there, particularly in China, Southeast Asia, and everywhere else. And you can kind of see, wind and solar are nowhere close to fulfilling their potential right now. So there's still a very, very large hope that at least 10 to 20 years, maybe even further into the future, this is going to explode and this is going to get a lot larger. So one thing about renewable energy in particular wind and solar is that it has this intermittency problem. Sometimes, if the wind isn't blowing at the kind of speeds you require, or if, there's not enough sunlight, such as during periods of winter, you don't get enough power to your power stations. And that's obviously a bit of a problem. What a few people don't really talk about is actually the reverse problem, where you have a little bit too much power. If you get like insane storms and they start, blowing around, your wind turbines can produce like too much energy. And if you get large periods of prolonged sunlight, you can also get too much energy on your power grid. To show you that this is not just a hypothetical, in Germany, they had this problem where a prolonged stormy period meant that there was too much energy in the system. And in California, large prolonged periods of sunlight meant that they actually had to pay adjacent states such as Arizona to take their electricity from them, because otherwise that large amount of power would overload the power grid. So as you can imagine, this is a bit of an issue that is somewhat preventing the large-scale adoption of renewable energy. And the solution is in energy storage. That batteries can store energy when there's too much power and then release it into the power grid when there's too little. The future expansion of solar panels and wind turbines is also going to require a lot of rare earth metals. And by a lot, we really mean a lot. To give you a quick estimate, EU countries will require about 18 times as much lithium and about 5 times as much cobalt in 2030 as they do now. So what does this mean? Why does this matter? Today, we are reliant on fossil fuels like oil, coal, etc. Oil, as you may expect, is concentrated in the Middle East, and there's been a whole geopolitical fight over oil because of its importance in energy. Now, rare earth metals, the production of rare earth metals, which is only going to increase in the future, is currently mostly in China. So you may see that as rare earth metals increases in importance for energy, the same sort of geopolitical competition, the same sort of reliance as we did on oil. Again, rare earth metals, the new oil, maybe not as impossible as it sounds at first glance. So let's finally talk transport. Transport is a sector that is very, very heavy in producing carbon emissions, and therefore electrification and making the sector more renewable is extremely important. What is the solution? Electric vehicles. The UK has already committed to banning new petrol and diesel cars from 2030 onwards, while the US, in its infrastructure bill, is pouring about $170 billion into electrification, including 500,000 new EV stations by 2030. And the US is also planning on replacing their entire federal car fleet, which is about 600 to 700,000 vehicles, with electric cars. We already talked a little bit earlier about China's very large electric vehicle market. So this is something that policymakers are definitely looking at, and this is one area that is going to expand drastically into the future. The question is not not if electric vehicles will become the new normal, but rather when they will become the new normal. So who are the leaders in this electric vehicle sector? Obviously, the huge one is Tesla. They're absolutely massive. They're, market leader in many, many ways. But there are a whole lot of other players in the industry as well. I want to emphasize that this is more competitive than it maybe looks. In China's more developed EV market, we look at, players like BYD or BAIC. And in the West, kind of, we look at more conventional car makers like BMW or Volkswagen. And you can't count those out. Those conventional car makers can still do very, very well in electric vehicles. What I want to emphasize today with electric vehicle industry is that it's still really competitive. There's no kind of one huge player just yet. And it's still very much in its infancy. There's still a lot of room to grow and change and develop. That's a basic overview of what's going on. To kind of summarize again, the world has committed to new climate targets. It seems much more serious than ever before. Expect a shift in policy as a result of that. And the four sectors to kind of focus on are renewable energy, electric vehicles, energy storage, as well as rare earth metals. These are going to be all crucially important in the next 20 to 30 years and show a lot of potential ahead. With that in mind, thank you very, very much for listening, and I'll just pass the time back to Steve.
Thank you, Ernest. Yeah, it's a very interesting presentation on the green industry in general. Okay, we'd like to invite Sien Hwang from Hasilwan and Sundram Bahat. He will be talking on power, solar in particular. Okay, we'll give a brief rundown on what his company is doing and share with us whatever he knows about renewable energy in that particular segment of solar. Okay, Sien, over to you, Sien.
Very good morning, Steve. Thank you for your kind introduction and also having me on your panelists for us to discuss this very interesting topic on the green revolution. What I'd like to share this morning is to give my view as a perspective as a green energy industry player, specifically in Malaysia. So let me move on to my next slide. So let me first start by introducing what Hasilwan does. We are a qualified and experienced power engineering company that is established 30 years ago. And if you just look at the pictures from the left to the right, this is pretty much what we have been doing in our years of experience. We basically construct electrical power grid infrastructure to enable the transmission and distribution of electricity supply to consumers. We also build power grid automation solutions in order to assist our grid operators to improve security and reliability of electricity supply. And we also construct, develop, and invest in renewable energy, specifically solar PV systems, in order to generate green energy into our grid. A little bit more about the company. So in terms of our qualification and experience, the energy industry in Malaysia is strictly regulated and requires technical and financially competent companies to undertake power infrastructure projects. And some of our experience actually covers the construction of the grid in a high voltage and medium voltage level, which pretty much means is on the upstream of the grid down to the lower stream to the grid right before your metering point in every building or factories. And so we built the substation, we built the transmission lines, and we supply equipment, and we also integrate what I call SCADA systems for the national grid network. Now, we design and construct and develop and invest solar systems to generate green energy in large-scale solar plants, commercial, industrial, and also residential buildings in all Malaysian states. So that's what we do. Yeah, that's our experience. Now, what I want to, well, all right. So just a quick, I think pictures would actually speak 1,000 words. So this is just some of the examples of the projects that we have done in Malaysia. On the top left corner, you see this is a shopping mall in Kuala Lumpur. It's owned by Aeon Big. And then, so we've also built a solar car park. And then we do, this is an example of a residential building. We've constructed solar systems for highway projects in Malaysia. This is a factory And we've also constructed ground-mounted solar systems. This is an example of how usually a solar farm will look like. So all different sorts of installations. Now, what I want to share with everyone this morning actually is to really explain about, in our view, being an industry player in Malaysia, where do we see the future of the power engineering business? If you look at this diagram, this is the electricity utility value chain, where you have the generation, the transmission and distribution segment, and the end user segment at the far right. Okay, and if you look at the gray line, well, you know, this is the current grid as of today, where we have the generation plants. Traditionally, we have coal power plants, gas power plants. We also have large-scale solar plants today. And the large power plants would then generate the electricity in real time, and they would then export it into our grid, and they would transmit the energy in, you know, by hundreds of kilometers down to the consumers, the load centers, whether it's a factory or a residential or a commercial building. Okay, so this is traditionally in the gray at the top here. This is what the grid is like today. Now, what's going to happen tomorrow, or is already happening right now, is if you look at what happens in the grid of tomorrow, look at the green items at the bottom. Now let's look again at generation. What will happen is, instead of having a base load large power plant, we are looking at having many different distributed generation plants, and they're most likely to be of renewable energy technology, such as solar PV. We have, it could be biogas, it could be biomass, it could be micro hydro plants, and we don't really have wind in Malaysia. But basically, this is what we call distributed generation. And all these plants, when, again, as what Ernest was saying, renewable energy has intermittency. So in order for you to control and manage the output of the energy, you need technology in order to monitor and control them, to balance the grid with, as well, with energy storage as well. So there will be an introduction of artificial intelligence and sensors from Internet of Things. All this technology will converge with renewable energy in order to provide the future generation of what we're going to see in the future. Now, then, when you generate the energy, you will need to transmit them to the consumers, right? So what happens in the future to the grid? Now, this is already happening, actually. It's called what we call a smart transmission and distribution grid. We have automations, you have utilities who are able to manage and control their grid, and this helps in terms of providing strong reliability. Again, intermittency from renewable energy would require the utility to better manage the grid supply. And you need automation in order for the utility to control all their physical infrastructure remotely. Now, then let's look at what's happening in the consumer space. Now what's going to happen in the future is you could have a residential home, you could have commercial building, you could have an industrial factory or plant, and they could all generate part, if not all, of their electricity through solar and with storage as well. Now, when that happens, then these consumers would be known as what we call prosumers. Prosumers meaning they're proactive in terms of just not consuming, but also exporting surplus energy to the grid. Now, and when they do that, where do these additional surplus energy go to? There will be a demand in the system for, perhaps in the future, electric vehicle. So when you have electric vehicle charging stations, they will need to purchase the electricity at perhaps different pricing structure. Because if a factory has surplus energy, he wouldn't mind selling it at a cheaper rate, for example, and then you would easily have an off-taker. It could be anybody, anywhere in the country. It could be a residential consumer. It could be an electric vehicle charging stations. So this is, in order for this to happen, we would see a convergence of technology or digital solutions actually to enable such transactions from happening. And there will be also an increase of energy efficiency practices for buildings. There will be smart technologies that will help you predict weather. Predicting the weather would actually help you perhaps reduce the running of your air conditioning unit. So that would in turn provide you savings. In future, if we're all driving electric vehicles, if we're in the office and our electric vehicle would be, plugged into the grid, we could actually have our energy sold back to the grid from our car. So our car in the future could be a power supplier as well, I would say. So all this is going to be very interesting in the future. And for our company, Hasilwan actually has a new vision right now, and we're looking to be a leading green engineering technology company with a mission to solve challenges in creating a net zero carbon sustainable world. So if you look at the blue boxes that I've highlighted, these are exactly what we have already been doing up to today. And in the future, we're going to be looking into more leveraging on more new technology and digital solutions as well in order to develop energy efficiency and operational efficiency advantages, and in order to help us reduce carbon footprint for our customers, as well as reducing energy costs, of course. Now, so being involved in all this, I think it's going to set us up very nicely for us to take advantage of being a player in the electric mobility infrastructure when that time comes. Yeah.
Sien.
Yeah.
Steve here. Can I just interject? You mentioned prosumer just now.
Yes.
I just spoke to a friend who, in fact, my brother-in-law installed the solar panel in his house when he renovated his house, bought his house and renovated. It took about 5 years to recover the investment. And this is for the benefit of our audience.
Yep.
Apparently, the cost of the panel has come down so much that the period to recover the investment and get free electricity going forward after the so-called recovery period is a lot shorter. Is that true?
I think currently, under the current net energy metering scheme from the government, generally the payback period for a home residential solar would be hovering around 5.5 to 6 years.
Okay.
Yes.
It still does.
Yeah. At the moment, it's at 5.5 to 6 years of a payback.
Okay.
So will that go down? Well, I would say look at the solar panel prices. They could go down. I mean, we are expecting it to go down. But right now, I can tell you that there is a recent surge of solar panel prices, and we won't see it coming down until the Q1 of 2022.
Okay.
But again, what Ernest was also saying, in a macro point of view, China controls a lot of the supply of renewable energy, especially solar panel prices. So whenever something, if there is a shift of a strong demand in the domestic market, as well as the American market or the European market, it does affect the prices that for us here in Malaysia. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. Sorry, carry on.
Thank you. All right,
Yep.
let me go. So I would like to just, conclude my presentation here. Right. So I'd like to conclude my presentation here with basically 5 points, and where I would see where the future is going to be for the green energy industry in Malaysia. My first point is, again, what you were just saying, renewable solar, the cost of solar It's continuing. It's expected to continue to drop on a downtrend. And likewise, energy storage. Now, this is very important because, again, intermittent energy storage would solve intermittency of solar, right? And when energy storage prices start to drop, you will then see a proliferation of renewable energy, solar plus storage in all across the country, because it would basically allow a consumer to not rely on the government net energy metering program, which is limited, and you need to apply it with a limited quota. I think that would get a lot of would allow a lot of consumers to be off grid, in fact. So that is going to be a very interesting space. Second point, the awareness of and the ESG requirement by, I think, investors, especially, I think large investors are definitely looking into putting more investment into ESG, and I expect that this space will also be very competitive. I hope so, because in fact it is really good for the industry. The renewable energy projects are capital intensive. It requires a lot of financing, and I hope that this industry will not grow without the support of also the financing industry. So I do expect that I hope the ESG policies would provide more funding and be more competitive in it. Yeah. Okay. My third point is that I've been talking about renewable energy, and I haven't really touched much about energy efficiency. I think energy efficiency is also equally important. I always like to explain energy efficiency. It's like if you have a cup, right, and you have a water, you would see holes in the cup, right? And when the holes in the cup where the water is leaking out, that would in order for you to plug those holes, that's what energy efficiency is. It's basically plugging the leakage, and then renewable energy will come on top of it. So actually, when you put these two together, you can see a tremendous amount of savings in your energy costs. So with this combination, I think it would be very, very attractive solution in the near future. Now, energy efficiency policies in Malaysia are not as matured as the renewable energy policies, but it will be coming very soon. So that is also something to watch out for. Now, the fourth point is the Malaysian electricity supply industry. There's a policy called the MESI 2.0. It was launched by the previous Minister of Energy. This basically will provide the decentralization and also the market liberalization of the Malaysian power industry, which basically allows prosumers and consumers to provide an open trade of electricity. This is obviously very, very interesting, because then there will not be a monopoly in terms of the retail space of electricity. It will be an open market. You will see peer-to-peer trading of electricity. You see companies acquiring, signing power purchase agreements with specific large-scale solar plants, instead of going through, instead of just having a single off-taker such as TMB. And there's going to be free trade of renewable energy credits, similar to what I think previously people would know as carbon credits. So all this is very exciting as well, and we are now moving towards that. Now the policy is already in place, but I think there's a lot of components for that to make it for the market to be fully liberalized. Now the fifth, my last point that I would like to highlight here is about electric mobility. Just look around our region, our neighbors. Thailand has an electric vehicle policy in 2017. Indonesia has an electric vehicle incentive rollout in 2019. Singapore has just announced that they're going 100% EV, electric vehicle, by 2040. For Malaysia today, I understand that we do have a national automotive policy, and there is discussions, and I'm going on about announcing what will be our policies for electric vehicle. I'm really looking forward to that. This is just, all this will actually have an increase of energy demand to follow suit when everybody switches to electric vehicle. And when that time comes, I believe that the competitiveness of renewable energy will also be a very attractive part for the EV vehicle owners. They would want to buy competitive electricity, and there will also be a better conscious of buying green energy. So again, this is the 5 points are my view of what I think that's going to be very exciting future ahead for the green energy industry. So again, thank you for your time for listening. Steve, back over to you.
Thanks, Sien. Very promising future. Yeah. Since you're on that topic, okay, we are officially entering the panel discussion. I'd like to invite our Ernest and Ming to be on the panel. Okay, you were talking about from your 5th point, it appears that Malaysia is behind our neighbors. Are we really behind? What are we doing? I mean, are you as an industrial player happy with the government policies being put forward to embrace green technology?
Well, I think, Steve, when it comes to, for me to comment about renewable energy, I think the government has done a great job since 2011, when they first launched the first feed-in tariff program for solar. Solar prices were still then quite expensive, and the returns of investment were not as great. But it's very important that government always takes the driving seat on this, and they have done well in that they set up policies. And today we've got strong regulators such as our Sustainable Energy Development Authority, SEDA. They do a very good job in terms of regulating and hearing, listening out to consumers. In fact, if tomorrow you say, for example, you have a friend that installed a solar panel on your roof, and if you're not satisfied with the service provided by your service provider, you could just lodge a complaint to SEDA. And that's very important, to have the framework of having a regulator in place in order to support such an industry. And also service providers needs to be licensed and certified by SEDA. And there is such a, if you can actually go and visit the SEDA website, service providers are all listed there. My advice is to look at not just someone who has a certificate, but you need to look at the experience that they have, and then decide yourself on who you like to pick. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
We have a question from the floor, from the audience. I think, Sien, you're probably more positioned to answer this. The government wants to achieve 25% renewable energy by 2025. That's only about 4 years away. But the latest NEM 3.0, Net Energy Metering 3.0, seems to be a worse package than the prior one. Do you have anything to say about this?
I think.
Or do you agree it's a worse package?
Perhaps they're probably, that comment is probably coming from a perspective of a person who would be interested in the commercial or industrial space. Okay.
Usage, yeah.
Yeah, the usage. But for residential, it's good news, by the way. So,
okay.
So it's you get to export your surplus of energy, on a one-to-one basis. It means the same price as what you would actually purchase from TMB. But for the commercial industrial, it used to be a one-to-one, right? It was very attractive, and the general payback period would be within the range of 4 to 5 years. Some would even go as low as the high 3 years payback. But that is also supported by fiscal incentives from the government. We have to be aware of that. And again, every site has their own different scenario of how you actually need to calculate your returns because you need to go through technical first.
Okay.
So right now where we are, the current policy is yes, it is the energy tariff that you need to export back to the grid. It's not going to be on a one-to-one basis. It's going to be based on what we will call a system marginal price, which is basically the real-time market average market rate of the energy that perhaps TMB is actually buying from the market. Because in Malaysia we have a different energy mix. We have coal, gas, hydro. So that average would be lower than what obviously much lower than what it would be, because the true cost of tariff that we're paying consists not just on the generation cost, but it also has transmission and distribution costs, and also service costs for TMB to service us. So that actually makes up of the whole tariff. We have to understand that first. So what the government is taking now is that they're saying, look, if you're a generator and if you're exporting to the grid, you should be paying the generation costs of what the other independent power producers are paying, rightfully speaking. You shouldn't be paid that whole cost, right? So I think that's what the government stand is.
In other words, TNB is saying, I am TNB, I generate electricity for you, I sell electricity for you. I have to carry all the costs, the related costs, as in infra and all that. And when you sell your electricity, there must be certain costs, maybe not comparable to what the TNB has to bear, but there must be some sort of cost. That's
Yes.
what I mean, right? Yeah.
That's correct. And I think again, if an audience would like to ask and say, then what happened last year, right? How come we were, how come it used to be attractive? Well, that's the government providing support for the industry, allowing that sort of attractive incentive in order to actually build a lot of local expertise and drive the local green industry. And I think that has really bode very well. So the last program, NEM 2.0, was actually a very successful program. But looking forward again, the energy price, the solar panel prices are still on a downtrend. Okay, if you looked at it overall, and the energy storage prices as well is expected to come down. I was told in Q4 this year or even Q1. Now, will that be enough to say I don't need NEM? Possible. I wouldn't say no. So to me, you need to speak to a service provider that is knowledgeable and will help you to look into your specific case. So that's partially why the government feels that they don't need to provide further subsidy anymore.
Okay.
Let the market react on its own. Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to take a step back, zoom out a little bit, approach things from a macro perspective, then we zero into the respective subsector of the renewable energy industry.
Sure.
Ernest, just now you were mentioning, you said, I mean, the world leaders are pretty serious about going green. Okay. But if you look at Donald Trump, when he was presidency, he left the Paris Accord. He said he was green. Okay. Do you think the US, China is playing this political ploy, or are they serious about it?
Okay, sorry, one sec. The thing about the US you have to kind of realize as well is that it's a very federalized country. So while the executive obviously has a huge impact, while the president has a huge impact on policy, individual states and individual constituencies within the US also have a large influence on what they're going to do. For example, California banned ICE cars, any internal combustion engine cars. I think their ban is by 2035. So they can enact those sorts of policies without there being a policy from the central government. So all of this is just to emphasize that yes, while world leaders play a large role, it's also down to the individual market players and kind of the bottom-up approach as well, that there are some of it. But in terms of are they actually serious, I think just to emphasize again, COVID-19 I think was a reminder to all of us that the previous two recessions, I guess 2008 and 97, they're caused by financial markets, but this is a recession that was caused very much by events outside of financial markets, caused by something that was in the natural world. I think this is, kind of a bit of a warning to policymakers, a bit of a warning to politicians. If we don't get this Climate Change Act under control, the next event that could influence financial markets could very much be a climate-related natural disaster or climate-related catastrophe. In China, I want to emphasize, part of the reason China is taking this more seriously is that, as you may know, Beijing suffers from an extremely bad air pollution problem.
Yep.
And obviously, the top brass of the Chinese government have kind of realized they don't want to deal with that, and the looming desertification of much of the West. In the US as well, the US is traditionally kind of, into big oil and all of that, but even they've kind of slowly grown and developed in this area. So I definitely think that, yes, rhetoric has been empty in the past, but the combination of COVID-19 and kind of new information means that they are a lot more serious than they are before.
Yeah. If you still remember, I mean, the developing nation has all this while been defending themselves. You developed country, you polluted the world for God knows the last 100 years, since the invention of the automobile, invention of the steam engine and all that. And now the developing nation, we are trying to develop, and yet you are slapping all sort of conditions, I mean, basically increasing our cost of doing business. I think that the argument kind of stopped until in Beijing, Shanghai, and all these places, you practically cannot see anything because of the air pollution. Okay, so I guess this particular argument just came to a standstill. I mean, it was halted because the developing nations suddenly realized it is not a political ploy. We are destroying the environment. Okay,
Yeah.
at the cost, I mean, at the expense of basically we're growing at the expense of the environment, right?
I just want to talk about that a little bit, because I think if you look at China, obviously China's a huge example, but even India has its own problems with air pollution as well. So the important thing to realize about climate change is that actually the impact of it is also disproportionately on developing countries. It's going to, there are, these predictions that Bangladesh could be underwater at some point in the future. These sorts of climate-related events are going to hit countries like us a lot harder than they are going to hit countries in the West. And I think we have kind of realized that as well. And that's why you've kind of seen this shift in developing countries. We're kind of next in the firing line, and we don't want to kind of suffer as a result of that.
Yeah, there is a question from the floor, or Ernest. I think you were talking more on the macro solutions and all that from the government initiative to solve the energy problem and pollution problem. Are there any initiatives from bottom up? Okay, I guess it's a cultural thing, right?
Yes. Even, okay, so I just want to emphasize, even in China is the perfect stereotype of this top-down, central authoritarian government. And even in China, individual provinces, individual cities can still enact a lot of policy. I think, for example, Shanghai, when they give out new license plates for cars, they're ones for normal kind of vehicles, non-electric vehicles are hideously expensive, while for an electric vehicle, significantly cheaper. So I think Shanghai has that initiative to kind of push forward electric vehicles. Individual provinces in China set their own targets, I think, in the new 5-year plan. So they are kind of responsible for guiding the direction. So that's a bit more of a bottom-up initiative. Individual provinces showing a bit more autonomy. In the US, as I mentioned before, even with Donald Trump as president and actively working against climate change in many fronts, you see many individual states and cities in the US saying, okay, we're not going to listen to that, and we're just going to do our own thing. California, even individual cities elsewhere. And because of the federalized nature of the US, states have large amounts of power. We talked about California's I-SPAN in the past. So yes, there are bottom-up initiatives, individual states and provinces, mostly in the US and China, doing their own thing.
Okay. Ernest, I'll come back to you on Joe Biden's 2 trillion infra plan. Okay, I just want to ask Ming. I think Ernest mentioned just now that the cost of renewable energy has come down substantially.
Yes.
Okay, can we very safely say right now that I think all of us should embrace it, should look at how to, us as a consumer, to look at consuming renewable energy. It is a feasible thing going forward. It's already a very, very feasible thing, whether it's from the solar side, whether it's from the wind or other form of RE. Okay, do you think we are at that juncture that we should just all embrace this green energy and slowly phase out the fossil and all the coal mines and all that?
I mean, I would say this process is a long-term process. We can't, straight away phase out coal or gas energy tomorrow or even next year. Why is that so? Is like what Sien mentioned. I mean, the infrastructure and the storage, these two main issues are still not yet ready for the large-scale usage of renewable energy. Because of the intermittent issues of a renewable energy, we need a smart grid, and then we also need a storage solution, which is not quite ready, I mean, yet right now.
Okay, so storage is an issue. I mean, we have lithium ion batteries and all that, but it is still not a very matured product, right? Am I right to say that?
It's quite made for lithium ion battery, is quite mature product, but the problem is the cost is still not super cheap yet.
Okay.
But but then if we are seeing more and more EVs are being deployed, and then the battery makers are rapidly increase their capacity. I think like one Sien mentioned, I mean, we expect this battery cost will come down.
Okay. Yeah. Sien, your experience on the storage side, what is it like?
No, I mean frankly, I wouldn't say that there is a lot of experience of storage that I've done. I've only done a couple of small projects on where it involves solar plus storage. Primarily is because of the cost is still an issue. As what I was saying, that which is also why our government is very much aware of the prices of storage at the moment, but they are also expecting that the storage prices would come down by Q4 or early next year, and then they would want to then see how will the market pick off from there. So I guess I can only comment from that. Yeah.
Okay. In terms of the global players, which country would be a model that Malaysia should be following? Coming or Sien? I would say the Scandinavian country, right? I mean, they are all into the wind and the solar and everything.
Yeah. So Steve, can I comment on the Scandinavian countries actually? So the Scandinavian countries, when you look at their model of renewable energy, they use a lot of hydro. And it's because of the way that their geography is that allows them to get away with using hydro. Like Norway has huge waterfalls and massive rivers just everywhere around the country, which is why they're very, very high up in renewable energy. I think something like 97%. Malaysia doesn't have those geographical advantages. We don't have the rivers and the waterfalls necessary to kind of run large amounts of hydro. So we will probably just have to rely a little bit more on solar, in which case there are probably other countries that can do that, not really Scandinavia.
Okay.
I would say it's more Southern Europe countries like your Portugal, your Spain, whereby their solar resources is there. Whereby for Scandinavian, it's more for wind and hydro, like what Ernest mentioned.
Okay. So whether the company, I mean, the country is successful in transforming their energy base depends also very much on the geographical advantage or disadvantages. Am I right to say that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. How about Americans? How far ahead or behind? I think Ernest, you probably know this. I mean, it's a huge country, 300 million population. Do they care at all? I mean,
Okay, so America is a very, very interesting country in a lot of ways because you think they would be really, really far along in a lot of ways, but actually when you look at their energy mix, it's actually shockingly low in terms of the amount of renewable energy that they use. America has developed a sort of policy. Well, they want to pursue what they call energy security, right? In the sense of making sure that they have their own energy and all that. So fracking has become a huge part of the Republican platform, expanded under Donald Trump. So as a result of kind of America's large, gas and oil operations, they haven't really felt the need to kind of go into renewable energy just yet, especially after, a Republican presidency. So if you look at it from that perspective, then obviously you can say, okay, America is pretty behind the rest of us, especially because, it's just really hard to get the Republican Party to kind of commit to any sort of climate change legislation. But when you look at some of the bottom-up initiatives from, again, states like California, even states like New York, then you start to see a little bit more hope because individual technologies that are coming up there in solar or whatever do look quite promising. So it's a very tough question because it is both yes and no. Objectively speaking, the last 4 years have not been good for the US, but if you look at kind of like some of the underlying things, we see a little bit more hope in that area.
Yeah, I can perfectly understand the sort of position they are in. It's like they are energy dependent on the Saudis and the Middle East for the longest time. And suddenly they're energy independent. And this bunch of green guys are just running around shouting slogan and blaming them for polluting the world. So from American perspective, it's kind of difficult to manage. I don't think they are willing adopter of green energy.
I want to say with America as well, you have to remember that the oil industry and they employ a lot of people. Like oil is a huge part of just American jobs. And these are not like low paying jobs. These are very, very well paid jobs. One of the interesting things actually, when you look at the Democratic Party is that they're supported by unions, right? And unions are actually in a little bit of a fight with progressives in the Democratic Party over this exact problem. That a lot of oil and gas workers in America are saying, okay, we're making 80,000 right now. How can you make sure that when we shift to a greener future, I'm not going to lose my 80,000 job for a job that pays 3 times less? That is the heart of the issue that also prevents a lot of action from going forward, because it is precisely in these sectors where the swing votes are. And if you want to appeal to these people and you want to win elections, you have to focus on that.
Yeah. Okay, Ernest, since you're on this topic, do you want to talk a little bit about Biden's infra plan? Is he going to invest a lot of money in renewable energy with this infrastructure program of 2 trillion? Okay, he just printed. American just printed 1.9, right? This 2 trillion is in addition to that. I'm assuming.
Yes, I think it's mostly going to be financed by a increase in tax. So I think there's going to be an increase in corporate tax to something like 28% as a result of that, which I think there's going to be some borrowing that will help cover. If you look at this infra bill, not all of it is related to climate change. So while people have said this is a climate change bill, it's not really a climate bill. It's more a general infra bill with some elements of climate change in it. So we can kind of see, I did talk about that 174 billion earlier into electrification, the EV stations. There's just some general, domestic supply chain stuff, buyer rebates, incentives for electric vehicles, replacing the federal fleet. So it is quite ambitious. I think there are hundreds of billions being spent on this, but the time frame is over the course of 10 years. So maybe not as ambitious as it looks on first glance. In terms of what likelihood it has of actually going through, here's the problem that Joe Biden faces right now. The progressive wing of the Democratic Party, AOC, Pramila Jayapal, head of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, they're very angry that the bill they say is too small. They're looking at a figure closer to 10 trillion than 2 trillion right now. And on the other hand, the Republican Party has basically said they're not going to vote for a bill that increases tax, especially so soon after their tax cuts. For a bill like this to pass the Senate, it has to go through this process called budget reconciliation, which means that the entire Democratic Party, all 50 senators currently that vote with the Democrats, need to vote for it. There's also one additional problem with that. It's not just that the progressives don't agree, but that the deciding 50th vote, usually on these Democratic issues, is this guy called Joe Manchin from West Virginia. The important thing to keep in mind with West Virginia is that it's a coal state, very reliant on coal for energy. A lot of mine workers there. And you could very much see a lot of concessions being made towards coal in these areas, just so that Joe Manchin can keep his job, basically.
Okay. We have got quite a few questions from the floor. I'm going to focus on that, clear that first. I'm staring at the clock. We don't have much time left, and I do have a very long list of questions for the panelists. Okay, this question is from floor. Manufacturing battery, energy storage, and solar panels require an enormous amount of metals and rare earth. Are such mining activities harmful to the environment? I'm looking at Linus, right? Anybody has got anything to say about this? I'm sure it will be harmful to a certain extent. Otherwise, the activists wouldn't have been so vocal and up in arms. But can it be contained? Can it be managed? Any guys? Guys, anybody has got anything to say?
Yeah, I think I'll just weigh in on this,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah, there is actually that huge risk of environmental concerns, right? There are, if you're just randomly digging up metals everywhere, a lot of these metals that you need are also quite close to radioactive spaces, radioactive metals, if I remember correctly. So there is, unless you treat it really carefully, there's a huge potential for kind of environmental problems. If you just randomly go into places and you just dig up the whole place and all of that, that also causes environmental damage. It's actually a huge problem because there's going to be an explosion in demand of rare earth metals at some point, right? And you've got just so much demand, and almost every single place with rare earth metals, there are some problems, right? Whether you are in China, say for example in Africa, you have huge social concerns with regards to the health of workers and general working conditions there. So yeah, I mean, they are right to say there are actually problems ahead, I think, for the environmental and social aspects of rare earth metals.
Essentially, growth and development, there is a cost to it. I mean, all of us know, right? Like in the case of Japan or the European countries, when they build the nuclear plants, they resort to nuclear power. They know very well there is danger in regards to the nuclear power plants, but it was producing so much energy, and they needed it to develop. As in the case of Japan, in the 80s and 90s, they were growing as fast as China was growing 30 years ago. So I guess they had no choice but to resort to something like the nuclear power. Okay. This is a very interesting questions for Sien, not specifically directed to you, but to one look at it, I know you would have the answer. How should businesses approach energy transition? In energy transition, I think this person is referring to from the old energy to the new energy. How should businesses approach energy transition of existing operation, as it based on the existing power source? Will there be a lot of existing assets to be retired or stranded, or is this the obstacle to this? I mean, to the business. Sien, when you approach your client, you're trying to convince them to adopt solar versus the existing source. How do you tell them?
Okay, thank you for the good question, Steve. You see, firstly, I actually treat every customer's condition very differently. I would always approach it first on understanding what the customer wants to achieve. Is it energy costs your top priority? Of course, most of it are. And then how about some companies, especially listed companies, have, especially MNCs and listed companies, have a very strong mandate on increasing their ESG activities. So sometimes then they would then ask me and say, okay, look, ESG and energy cost is the top priorities. I would then say, okay, I'll go ahead and perform a technical analysis on their current consumption. I would, for example, I'll take a look at your bills. I'll look at your existing plant structure. If you're using so much of energy, and if the fastest way to deploy a green energy savings could be solar. That would be a quick one. And then and at the same time, we will look at your existing efficiency in terms of your consumption in your plants. If you have motors, if you have air conditioning units, we'll look at how we could improve that. Again, that's where the energy efficiency part comes in, right?
Mhm.
So and also when I talk about energy efficiency, I'm not just talking about installing something where it incurs capex. There is also a possibility that I could come up with a proposal that would help you in either spending very little capex or even no capex, and you could still save, right? It's just a very simple analogy. It's like, for example, I'll say, your behavior, right? If everybody just comes into a room and it's always at 18 degrees Celsius of your air conditioning unit, and then everybody puts on a jacket, right? And I say,
Yep.
look, what if I could tell you, I could tell you what the temperature outside is or what the weather is going to be, and then I'll tell you that you don't need to set it at 18. You can set it at 20, 22, and you'll be comfortable, right? That alone, without any capex, you would already save, right?
Yep.
So that's an example of how we use digital solutions to help a customer save, right? So that's one. And then renewable energy is more straightforward, where I'll just look at your roof size, and I'll actually, and also of course I need to look at the current policies and help you calculate your payback, right? So it's really that's how I would approach someone who wants to transition to looking at how they could be efficient in green technology.
Yeah. I think regards to solar power, transition to solar power, there's probably not many so-called obsolete assets to retire. That's probably that particular industry has such characteristics. But if you're talking about other industry, it could be, I mean, other form of power source, it could be different.
Yeah.
Okay. We have got a lot of questions. We have got a lot of questions before during the registration. I'm afraid we cannot tackle them. If I don't address your question, please accept my apology, because we just don't have the time to do that. Let me just very quickly jump into EV before the time runs out, because it's one area I think it will have impact all of us. Okay, whether should we buy an electric car, should we buy a hybrids and all that. I just want to direct the questions to Ming. We already in the EV era, Volvo has made commitment, the UK has made commitment. How far are we into the EV era? Because there are not enough charging stations right now. I drive into the Bangsar shopping complex. All the charging bays are always eternally full. Okay, if I'm driving a EV hybrid vehicle, where do I charge? Are there government policies to encourage ownership of EV? If they are going to be, if they are encouraging EV, are they going to get enough charging station ready? I think in China, they employ a different model. Not sure whether it's going to be a future. My friend was just telling me he came back from China. If you're driving an electric car, you drive to a shopping mall, you pull out your battery, you walk to the counter and exchange for a new fully charged, a fully charged battery and install it in your car. It's like they already got this modular battery sort of exchange program going on. You are not charging your battery. You're merely exchanging a rechargeable battery of your car. I guess the car has to be built in such a way that it is run on modular batteries. Okay. Over to you, Ming. What do you think? How far are we into this EV game?
I mean, before that, address your statement on the changing of battery in China. Actually, that is just only apply to this China brand called NIO.
Okay.
And they call this as battery as a service. I mean, so far, if I'm not mistaken, only they are the one that are doing this kind of services, whereby most other EV OEMs are still mainly rely on charging posts. You have to charge your battery. I mean, even Tesla's. Someone asked Elon Musk, are they going to do battery as a service? He said no. He still thinks that the charge the battery, that one makes more sense. And then on your question on how far are we from EV era, I think you're referring to Malaysia, right? If that's the case, so far I didn't really see any policy or incentive come out from the government to sort of to drive this initiative. I mean, like, then because for this to happen, we need to have sufficient charging station or infrastructure, which we don't have. And then another thing is, if our power mix is still rely on fossil fuel, it makes no sense to push EV, because at the end of the day, the electricity still come from coal or gas, which emits carbon, right? So I mean, since I'm not seeing much from government to do renewable energy as well, so I think from Malaysia perspective, we are still quite far from EV era.
Regards to the hybrid cars, there are already tax incentive. You know, the hybrid cars are basically at least about 20% cheaper than the full petrol. Okay, that is probably the most visible government initiatives regards to EV. I think we had this discussion before coming. This whole thing will only make sense if the source energy is clean.
Yes.
Okay, if your source energy is dirty, you're feeding into a clean vehicle. It doesn't make sense, right? I mean, I guess what the government has to do. I mean, the Sien, you are a industrial player, and you want to feed back to the government. It has to be clean all the way, not dirty to clean. It doesn't make sense to drive a electric car if the source coming from the socket, the power source is actually coal fired from the coal fired plant.
Can I add to that, actually? It's like, yes, we understand that obviously it's if the source isn't clean, then it isn't clean, right? But you've got to make sure it starts now, because these things take time to actually grow and develop. And if we don't start now because we say, okay, it's not going to be perfect immediately, then we're going to miss the boat. It's going to take a lot longer for us to actually kind of get there. So I think, yes, it's not going to be clean now, but it is going to be clean in the future. And it's better to get started now than to worry about that question at least. We can do both at the same time. It doesn't have to be step one first and then step two. Just proceed with both and go with it from there.
Yeah. Coming question for you. If I am interested to invest, you don't have to specifically mention name of company. If you can, I think that will be fine. In the entire renewable energy, green technology field, if I want to invest my money, where should I put it? Is it solar? Is it hydro? Is it nuclear? Or is it storage? Or what? As a analyst, what would you be focusing your attention in?
I mean, among renewable energy, the one that has the most potential in terms of further cost reduction will be in solar.
Solar, okay.
Yeah. So that's why I think that sector is the most promising among the renewable energy.
Okay. How about storage?
Storage also, I mean, storage also apply for all the renewable energy regardless of resources. I think that also makes sense. So how do we invest into storage? We mainly invest through the battery makers. The top 3 battery makers in the world are like CATL from China, and then LG Chemical and SK Innovation from Korean.
Okay. Sien, your site you guys have got plans to list your company?
Yes, it's always in the plans.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
So if you list the company, for our audience, the Hasilwan is definitely a very interesting company to basically monitor their development, judging from Sien's presentation of their plan going forward, basically essentially going to the different areas of this green field. Okay, let me just take a couple more questions. I have very little time left. Okay, is having a liberalized market for the energy space and smart grid important to push green revolution? If yes, how soon do you think Malaysia can achieve that? Let me read again. Is having a liberalized market for energy space and smart grid important to push the green revolution? I think that's for you, Sien.
Yeah, thank you for the very good question. My answer is absolutely yes.
Yep.
I think today the grid is ready.
Mm-hmm.
TMB has been looking into, equipping their grid for distributed generation. And I think also the concept is very similar as what Ernest is saying. You can't wait for everything to be perfect. You need to get going from the beginning. And until we get to that point, it's going to be a long and challenging journey. It's not going to be a smooth road. And it's I think your question is also to say, yes, the grid is important, and also government policies are also equally important. In order to liberalize the market, you would actually drive a lot more adoption, to have free trade of electricity. So then people don't have to go bid for a limited quota, and I think one of the audience comment was, say, oh, why is the NEM 3.0 not as attractive as before, right? Well, that's because the journey that we are going to is towards market liberalization. When that happens, and when energy price, solar and battery prices come down, you then see a proliferation. We could have individual homes going off grid. That's even possible. Technically, it's already possible today, but the question is about a couple of things. Regulation, right? It needs to allow that to happen. And we are moving towards that. The government has announced it, but in order for a full market liberalization to take place, mind you, even in Singapore, our neighbor, it took them 15 years to get fully liberalized. So it's not a smooth journey. It's just a lot of components in order to make that happen. And I think it's very important that we start now. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let me see. There is what about other alternatives, as in green hydrogen? Anybody know what this is all about? Green hydrogen? Do you know what it is?
Yeah, sure. Green hydrogen. What is green hydrogen? Is the process of making hydrogen from water. I mean, jump a bit more, because water is H2O. So
H2O,
the process that break H2O become hydrogen, and hydrogen from that process is called green hydrogen. Because for the hydrogen that generated right now is mainly from fossil fuel. That we call as like brown hydrogen, something like that. It's like definitely not clean. So green hydrogen is that one. So what is the application of green hydrogen is for storage purposes. Why is that so? Like, I mean, okay, so lithium-ion battery can only store energy for up to a few hours. So if we would like to store energy for days or even months, we need, now the solution now is natural gas. But going forward, if you want to go clean, then hydrogen is something like clean version of natural gas. So that would wait until, I mean, if our renewable energy mix is more than 50 or 60% of the electricity mix, then we definitely need hydrogen to store the power. I mean, how far of us from there? I think easily 15 to 20 years.
Still pretty early days.
Yeah, because our electricity mix from renewable energy is low anyway, so we don't really need a lot of green hydrogen now. But if it picks up to like 50-60%, then yes, we need.
Okay, yeah. Okay, we are running out of time. Time is up already. Can I just invite the panelists to say your famous last words before we close today's forum? We'll start with we go according to the sequence of the speakers. Ernest, you want to say something?
Yeah. So I think just to kind of recap everything we've gone through today, governments are definitely taking it more seriously than before, and the trends are definitely going to change. So just because things didn't work out 30 years ago or 4 years ago doesn't mean that the trend isn't continuing. Having said that, I'll just kind of go back to what Sien said and said this is a long road ahead. We're thinking in terms of like 10, 20 years rather than just necessarily in the next 2 to 3 years. So watch for this definitely in the long term, but the trends are changing, the ground is shifting, and you can't ignore that.
Yeah, I personally am a big fan of all these things. Looking at all the pictures, looking at all the habitats of the wild animals being destroyed, it just breaks my heart. Sien, you have any famous last word?
The current renewable energy target for Malaysia is at 20% for us to achieve 20% of energy mix by 2030.
2030.
Sorry.
Just 9 years away.
So it's a very tall order, and I think all stakeholders need to actually play their role in supporting that. There's no one is alone on this, and I hope this really can become a green revolution for all of us in Malaysia. If there's a program for your solar home, go get it, because when you dip your hand in it, you have a you have a better idea and feel of what you can do, at least in your piece to the environment. And our local industry is ready for that. We already have the framework. We all just need to stand behind it and push forward together. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Sien. Coming, you have anything to say?
The green revolution is definitely a future. It's not a fad. Why is that so? Is renewable energy the cost has become competitive with traditional fossil fuel. Then from Malaysia perspective, I hope government can roll out more incentive and policy to further push this, because now we are because now we are quite frankly a bit behind if we compare with our neighboring countries. Yeah.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of our online webinar today on the green revolution. We hope today's session provided everybody with valuable and hopefully greener insights to guide you in your everyday life and investment decision-making process, either as an amateur, a business owner, or investor. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our panelists, Ernest, Sien, Ming, for sharing their understanding and knowledge of these pioneering industries and their players. We would be very, very appreciative of you to complete the survey. The moment you log off the Zoom, the survey is going to pop up, because that's going to help us to improve our future events. And let us know what sort of topics you would like us to research and cover in the future. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention in the last 1.5 hours. And until the next webinar, The Trend, take care and stay safe. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks.